One of the most difficult concepts of shadow integration work or this radical, deeper work on self love is the idea that why would we want to love aspects of ourselves that we spent our whole lives trying to kind of eradicate, to not be? Like the person who's lazy or needy or greedy or selfish or mean, or the person who could hurt people or does hurt people. All of those aspects we've spent our whole lives trying to not be them. So, how would we really reconcile this idea that we are supposed to love them? And one of the things I think we need to maybe think through here is possibly a better word for this is we need to include them. Now, it seems a little bit kind of like sterile to say that, right? Because what we want is to like love ourselves. We want to feel the sense of love. We want to have this feeling, this visceral feeling of love for ourselves and for others. And some people talk about this concept of unconditional love. Okay, so unconditional love is the idea that you love somebody no matter what they do, no matter what they say, no matter how they act. And as humans, it's kind of unrealistic to have that type of love and also the desire to stay with somebody, hanging out with somebody who's acting out in ways that maybe are like completely rude, mean, and unacceptable. And so it gets a little murky in our minds. We talk about unconditional love, we talk about self love, we talk about, this idea that if you really love somebody that you can stay with them no matter what. And, but that's all kind of like a little bit elusive for us. And when I think about this, I want to shift our minds out of this idea that love, when I say love, that it's like loving the parts of yourself that you actually find lovable. This concept that we connect it to like some type of positivity, and that like how could we ever love somebody's characteristics that are negative and kind of like awful. And when I use the word include, I think it starts to feel a little bit better. Imagine we're trying to be inclusive. We are trying to, one of the biggest sources of suffering is when we enter this space that we have to cut off things that are part of our reality in order to be accepted and to be good. That's what happened when we were young. We were this vibrant, authentic being, and then we found out that there are certain ways that we need to act in the world in order to be accepted and maybe even loved. And so we had these things that we were given the message really clearly, like don't be that, don't do that, do more of this, do less of that. And all of these ways that we're sort of guided by our parents to be socialized, which is, really probably absolutely necessary in some ways. We then spend the rest of our lives trying to reclaim those aspects of ourselves. I have a couple things I want to say about that. The first thing is when we're young, what happens is each one of those pieces, and by the way, it happens all the way through our lifetime. We learn new things that are, this is now acceptable, this is no longer acceptable, how to be virtuous, how to be good, and how to be safe. That's really what we're ultimately trying to achieve is safety. And until we learn how to transcend that and be able to find and source inner safety, which actually comes through this process of inclusion, we have all of these things that we have sort of banished. And what happens is imagine it's sort of like this. Each time that you get told that you can't be a certain way, then there's a part of you that gets a little teeny tiny hole in it, because you take that little part and you put it out into like maybe a backpack where you then carry the burden of all those shadows. Or maybe it's just out in the ethers, right? And you become this fragmented being. You become this piece of you that is like that, like you have all these little holes. You're like Swiss cheese, and you feel a sense of emptiness, a sense of lack of fulfillment, and maybe even a sense that like anytime anybody tells you anything loving, it kind of pours right through you, because literally you are this whole filled person. And what happens is through life we then get all these things that happen that recreate childhood things that happened that help us to find those aspects of ourselves and then reclaim them and take fragmentation and make it become integration. We integrate them, we include them. So while we call it self-love, and self-love is a massive element of this, there's an actual genuine need to love our inner child, to love ourselves, to take care of ourselves, to prioritize ourselves, to listen to ourselves, to know that what we have to say matters, and that it has to matter to us first before we can ever expect anyone else to think that it matters. And so we know that that's critically important, but there is this more almost like sort of neutral aspect of it, which is you will never feel complete and whole if you are resisting and rejecting and exiling and disowning aspects of yourself, aka aspects of humanity, aka aspects of consciousness. So it's almost like it's a less emotional journey. It's kind of like saying, oh gosh, I am everything. Every aspect and element of me is within me, of consciousness is within me. And so therefore, do I really want to reject these? Now, let me just give you a caveat to it. Actually integrating these pieces of ourselves, it really means we're taking it from the unconscious or subconscious and we're bringing it to conscious awareness. So it seems kind of like, oh my God, but I don't want to be that. I don't want to be lazy, a liar, a greedy person, mean, unkind, all those things. I don't want to be those. Exactly. So when it's in your unconscious or subconscious, it will sneak up on you in unconscious ways. It will be your self-sabotaging behaviors. But when you bring it to your conscious awareness, what you do is you integrate it into this part of like, oh, you get to be here. It's sort of almost like, all right, I don't really believe this, but it's kind of like the concept of like keeping your enemies close. So it's like these aspects of self that do have the potential to go rogue and end up like hurting you and others. If it's in your subconscious, you bring it to your conscious awareness, and you get to say, when you're in these difficult situations, you get to start choosing, well, when, what do I want to do in this situation? Like, being a person who is lazy is really not always bad, right? Sometimes we need to be lazy in order to rest and to recover and to rejuvenate. And so I like to look at this as like there's a dial. So there is a dial that you can turn that makes laziness turn into gluttony and basically like sloth. And there's also a dial that brings it to this moderate place of saying, oh, you know what? Sometimes I need rest. And then we start to give ourselves permission because we're not so judgmental of laziness. Same with neediness. Even same with disrespect and meanness, because there are times when we have to stand up and put up a boundary, and that boundary could be perceived as rude or mean or disrespectful or uncaring, but actually that's the trick with it, is like when you have a relationship that's in judgment of those things, then you will have a harder time doing the dialed back version of it too. And so when we begin to integrate these as impulses rather than things we do, we actually start to realize like, wow, I have a lot of impulses. I have an impulse to maybe eat that thing, but I'm going to now be in choice because I know that I have this part of me that does tend to like to be a little more gluttonous when it comes to sweets. Or maybe like, I have an impulse to defend myself, and maybe we'll honor that more. Maybe I will have to defend myself, but maybe I'm not going to defend myself by like lashing out and hurting a person, but I might turn the dial down and I might say, oh, I'm going to defend myself by using my words or asking for what I need or setting a boundary. But when we have a rejection of, when we have like a story around something and then we reject aspects of ourselves, what happens is then we find that we either judge other people and then we're completely hypocritical, or we're so difficult with ourselves and what we expect of our behaviors in the world. We're so hard on ourselves that we end up then turning it around and then being the negative thing toward ourselves. So for example, you might think like, say, disrespect, like you'll never be disrespectful to other people, even if it means you have to be disrespectful to yourself in order to never put it out into the world. So how do we dance between these aspects? How do we hold it so we don't have to project it onto others, nor do we have to project it inward on us, but we can actually just come into honest relationship that we are all of these aspects And then we come into a relationship with them. We see all these different parts. I got the part of me that wants to be that feels like being disrespectful right now, but the part of me that also really wants to be loved and accepted. I have the part of me that wants to rest on the couch, but the other person that feels the pressure to be doing things and getting, being productive. So we start to have a relationship with the many parts rather than resisting and rejecting. And what we know is that what we resist persists. So if we don't ever bring our conscious awareness to it, it does haunt us and it causes us deep suffering. And that fragmentation causes us the feeling of lack of fulfillment. It causes us a feeling of emptiness, loneliness. It causes us the feeling of that we can't hold on to faith and trust that we are loved, and that we can't even feel it ourselves. And it even really kind of causes us to feel this sense of lack of safety, like a true lack of safety, because we don't really feel safe because we're like disconnected from ourselves. So I want us to shift the word in some ways just a little bit away from this concept of love, which kind of connotes like a little bit of like positivity, lovability, and move it to include, the word include. So we're going to do inclusion and integration work. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this. Thank you for bearing with me. I expected it to be a little shorter, but it's just there's so much to share about this, and I hope you can take it in and maybe understand it and maybe take some aspects of this that are meaningful for you. Thanks.